everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Welcome to our fourth session of our Caregiver Training and Support Seminars funded by the Hussman Foundation. Today we will have Stacy presenting to us again, but we also have a special guest. We have Angel. She is joining us today to share her perspective. She worked with her mother, who is her communication partner, to prepare some answers to some questions we sent to her ahead today. And I know that she's excited to share her perspective, and I'll go ahead and let her mom share her prepared intro statement.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Jill. Name is Angela. And we put together some information and thoughts from Angel to share with everybody today. Our introduction is, my name is Angel Brinkley. I'm a fifth grader at Kennedy Discovery Middle School and a non-speaker, but always thinking. I like to believe that I am speaking for those kids that are still stuck till someone believes in us. They will continue to interpret spelling as one big lie.
I love that. You go, Angela. Tell them it's not a lie. We have something to say and a way to say it. Love it.
So the first question today is, what things do your caregivers or parents do to support you that you find the most helpful?
And Jill said, I think what some parents expect is just for you to relate to what I go through. I am honestly happy my parents found spelling. It has opened a new world to explore in the time we have to exist. It is most helpful to diminish the idea that my autistic friends have to only use a tablet to communicate. To most people, this type of spelling is too much moving, or it is not my thoughts. It is exactly why too many autistics are stuck in their own bodies. It is my hope that I can yell to the world that we too, more than many others, can see the world.
I love it. That's a great response, Angela.
This is Angel.
Angel,
All
Angel,
Angel.
Angel, sorry, Angel. I am horrible with names. Thank you, Angel, for sharing your perspective.
Our next question is, what do you wish teachers and caregivers knew about non-speaking people?
I usually expect that people do not believe that I am smart. In the past, that I am not understanding the time it takes to help me. I want to let the world know that it is okay to be different. Teachers have to think outside the box. They must determine in their minds that we are not morons. Each day, I have to battle a world made by people that are not like me. I want a day where autistics are considered as the people God made us to be. That is to be happy, effective members of society, and healthy, exceptional humans.
Love it. I'm with you, Angel. I'm with you. Trying to shift that narrative. Autistic individuals have a place. We just need to provide support. Thank you for sharing.
And our last question today is there anything you would like to share about yourself?
I like science. I like to exhibit cats and dogs. I can investigate their habits. I want to be a veterinarian. The animals in my kindergarten class made me interested. I like ice cream, but it does not agree with me. I want them to know it's hard being this way. My goal is to help other autistic people, not as but as human beings.
Thank you
Thank
for
you so
sharing.
much for sharing your thoughts with us. We really appreciate you taking the time to do that because I know that spelling does take a lot of work and time. And so we appreciate you taking that time to share your perspective with us today.
And Jill, I have a little girl that is the same age as you, and she has the same interest, and I think I need to get the two of you together. So I will talk with your mom.
Please do.
Yes.
Please do.
Another little girl, and she looks just like you, and she loves animals. She loves animals. Yes.
We look forward to it.
I will get that information from Claire. Thank you, Mom, for being her communication partner. It really makes a difference for me as a person who works with parents. I do appreciate on my behalf because now I get to know your daughter because you're working with her, but also on your daughter's behalf of you doing something a little different than was expected when you had a baby. And this is what life is. We just have to shift and pivot and do what we have to do. So thank you, Mom, for being open to helping her communicate.
Thanks you guys for the opportunity because we really want to get thoughts out of kids just like Angel
Mhm.
and to let them know that what is possible and
Mhm.
that these children don't have to be limited. It's
Mhm.
just something that's different. And if we take the time to look at these kids and figure out it's only different, it's not less than, then
Mhm.
they can move forward in a way that, we probably couldn't even imagine when we first heard about this diagnosis.
Mhm.
So I truly appreciate the time personally. And you also can see that not just with practitioners, this is something that can go forward to other family members to
Mhm.
to continue to put out there that this is a concrete way of communicating, even though it's new and different.
Mhm. Yep, that's it.
So thank you.
I
Mr.
remember, and
Badon?
this has nothing to do with autism, but when we think of new and different, I remember when the microwave came out and everybody was like, "Woo, it's gonna give you." Now, I mean, look where we are now. Like, remember we were like, "Whoa, it's like new and different is okay." It's like we grow, we learn more. So, thank you so much. All right, I'm gonna stop.
Welcome. Thanks. You want to say bye to everybody?
Bye, Angel.
Thank you.
Okay, Stacy, you shouldn't have any problem screen sharing, but let
Let's
me check. And we should be able to move into your slide deck.
if I
Let me make sure.
actually push the button, then maybe it will share. Oh, let's see.
I fixed it. It should work now.
Gotcha. All righty, here we go. I'm going to hope this, all right, this is always the tricky part for me. All right, so I'm going to make this bigger. So all you should see is the slide, hopefully. And I'm going to push present and hope it all works out. Present full screen. All right, are we all able to see the slide? Or should I say, if you can't see it, Claire, just let me know. All right, so we are here to talk a little bit about parenting autism, right? Chaos to calm. And I say that because I don't think chaos to calm is specific to autism. I think all of us who are parents, sometimes it's a little chaotic, right? But I think when it comes to parenting an autistic kiddo, it's how do we get to the calm for our kids who may have different needs than their sibling who is not autistic? Or if they are an only child, I don't know what to do, right? And there's no manual for parenting any children. You're kind of winging it when you're parenting if you haven't figured that out yet. And then we have books, right, from other experiences and parents share. But it really is individualized. When you're parenting, each of your children is different. Each human is a different human being. But how do we parent under the umbrella of autism? Because it is parenting just a little bit differently. Really quick, I am your presenter for this topic today, and I am an autism education specialist with a background in speech therapy. I love absolutely everything that has to do with autism. And as I was telling Angel, I have a podcast that I co-host with an autistic gentleman, and we are determined to shift the narrative on everything autism. And we just actually released an episode on parenting challenges, and that link is in the slide. But I think that just to sort of piggyback off what Angel said, and her mother, it's important that everyone start to see that things can be different and it's okay. And how do we support parents who are trying to support their children so that we can build more inclusive environments? All right. So today we are going to identify some common challenges that come with parenting an autistic or ADHD kiddo, or the new terminology. There's terminologies every month, right? Neurospicy. But our kids are a little neurospicy, right? Just a little neurospicy. Some are not as spicy. And it depends on what spicy is for the parent. Identify solutions to those challenges is also something that we want to do. I am a firm believer in being proactive. I am a firm believer in problem solving, and it's what I love to do because I feel like there's always a solution. It may be something a little different, but it's okay. All right. When I thought about, what my parents have said and the input I've received from parents and what I've watched over the past 23 years in terms of autism specific families having these initial challenges, I will say that the challenges for parents that have an autistic kiddo are very different than the challenges for parents of other disabilities. And I say that with the transparency, honesty, forthrightness of, a lot of times just pretty much treat it like crap, right? Compared to other parents. And I'm saying that because I've watched it. I've watched a family that has a child with a diagnosis of maybe Down syndrome or cerebral palsy or hearing impaired or dyslexia. And those parents are embraced, right? Parents of children that are autistic are not always embraced, not always received well at the school or the doctor. So those initial challenges are evaluations, right? Fighting to get an evaluation, fighting to get the right evaluation, fighting for the right diagnosis, finally getting a diagnosis, and then what do I do with that, right? No one tells you what to do. School, the battle of getting either the right classification, the right supports, the school even accepting the diagnosis is a challenge for many, many families. Schools accepting different ways of communicating is a challenge in terms of children who communicate with technology or whether it's a spelling method. The schools seem to push back, right? Push back, push back. And then we have the challenges of family and friends. And this is real. This is the part that gets really, really difficult for families because you thought you had a support system in family and friends. You get a diagnosis. You're advocating for your kiddo. You're trying to get things in place. You're making phone calls, weeding through all of the information. And you have family and friends who are not supporting you, right? And when I say supporting, it doesn't have to be that it's embracing a diagnosis with, the same energy level that you as the parent are. It's supporting you in terms of doing things to lift some of the weight off of you so you can attend to those things. And I always say, family and friends sometimes really want to help. They just don't know how. And so they say the wrong things. They back up. They stay out of the way. And when I work with parents, I tell them, make a list of things that would be helpful, right? What would be helpful? And one of the things a mother, she wrote a list and she shared her list and she said, it would be really helpful if someone would come and have coffee with me once a week, right? For me to have just adult interaction without talking about children. Another parent of mine said it would be really helpful if someone would help me make visual supports, right, for my kiddo, like come over and hang out with me and cut and paste. I mean, people do scrapbook parties. Can we do a visual support party, right? So sometimes we have to know what support we need in order for family and friends to support us. And also, we know there are some family and friends who are not really going to be supportive, and that's just part of life, right? We weed out those and we don't spend energy on those folks. But it is important, those challenges that happen with family and friends, it is important to communicate what you need. Sometimes it's just they don't know what to do, right? And sometimes they just really don't care. I mean, that's the sad reality, but sometimes they don't. Community is also another challenge in terms of community events, right? Not being sensory friendly. Community events, not having accommodations for autistic kiddos in terms of maybe wheelchair ramps are available and accessible everywhere, but are there any charging components for autistic kiddos who need their communication device charged when they are participating in conferences, right? Or community events. These are things that parents have to think about when they go out, right? And they want to participate. Their autistic family member wants to participate. The community doesn't have the supports in place. So that's a challenge. That's another challenge, right? And I'm not saying these challenges for us to feel martyr mom, martyr dad. I'm not saying these challenges to say, oh my gosh, woe is me. I'm saying these are the challenges and we acknowledge them, and what can we do to resolve and eliminate these challenges, right? Because life is life. We can't make everyone do and accept, but we can put things in place to make it a little easier. One of the biggest challenges for families is the spouse, co-parent, different level of acceptance. There are a lot of divorces, separation, because of a disability, but specifically autism seems to create a dynamic of either one parent's all on board and the other's not, or the parents are on board with two different approaches, right? And then there's an issue, right? There's an issue. And so I think that for me, I often think about, wouldn't it be great if there were therapists? I know we already have a shortage, but if there were therapists, psychologists, social workers, someone that had a program, developed a training so that parents could get the help they needed as parents of an autistic kiddo, right? I think that parents need a place to go, and there's no place to go, right? Or there are very few places to go. And so if spouses could get some support from a therapist or a psychologist or a social worker to navigate those differences, then I think it would be really helpful. We're kind of a little ways from that, but we're working on it. We're working on it. All right. So I wanted to give a couple of examples of sort of what these challenges can look like. And these are examples that have been told to me, shared to me. We have problem solved. These are kind of common things that happen. It's not the experience for every person, but a lot of times friends and families do not agree with the diagnosis, or they judge your parenting style and contradict the supports you have in place. So this looks like, the parent or the friend that says, oh, they're not autistic, the grandparent, there's nothing wrong with that child. Well, we didn't say anything was wrong. We just said they're autistic, right? But that's the kind of verbiage that parents have to deal with. And I say deal with because it is difficult to deal with pushback from people that you love and care about, people that are in your circle, and you're trying to get things in place for your kiddo, right? You don't need to have to deal with that. People judging you on you allowing your child to eat their sensory safe foods and telling you should feed your children something different or starve them for 3 days. That's not what we want to do, but that's the pushback, right? That's the struggle. That's the thing that causes parents to stay away and feel isolated because you don't have the energy to deal with that pushback, right? Lots of contradiction for supports you have in place. I'll give one of my favorite but not favorite examples is mom has an AAC device for her kiddo and they've been using it at home and she brings it wherever the child goes. And when the child goes to this particular family event, Every single time the great aunt says, oh, they don't need that. They can talk. Don't give them that thing. They can talk. Yeah. Does that help? No, doesn't help. But it's what you have to deal with. And if you're a parent and you push back on that, you advocate for your kiddo, then you're the one ostracizing the family. And what does that lead to? It leads to broken relationships and intense levels of resentment within the family, right? And that's something we really shouldn't have to deal with. But it is part of sometimes what a lot of families have to deal with. And the other example, as I stated before, that's very common is the different levels of acceptance, right? Parents not agreeing with a diagnosis. One parent is in denial, one parent goes in and out of denial. This often leads to divorce. And unfortunately, because families don't have enough supports in place to help with this, then separation, divorce, or abuse within the environment. And the abuse is not necessarily abuse spousal to spousal, but families have had to separate, parents have had to leave with their child because one parent spanks a child for stimming, right? Or punishes a child for not communicating verbally. Well, that's traumatic, that's unfair, that's abusive. So a parent has to make a decision to dissolve their family to keep their child safe. And it's a very uncomfortable position to be in. It's a very difficult position to be in, but it is a very common situation. And I'm talking about this because if any of us are in fields or know people, we need supports for parents. And I'm not saying that parents need so much more than the child does. What I'm saying is the challenges that parents have, which is what we're talking about, if parents had support when they received a diagnosis, someone to work with them, even if it's mentors of other parents, right, who've already raised their kids, like starting an organization where parents mentor newly diagnosed parents, that can make a difference, right? And we can avoid all this family stuff that happens, and then someone's single parenting an autistic child, or the child goes from one place to another. I'm not saying people can't get divorced if their marriage is not working. I'm saying when a diagnosis is sort of the thing that brings the conflict, then it would be helpful if parents had support so they could work through that together. All right. Now, what I wanted to sort of briefly throw in here, now that we've talked about some of the systemic challenges, right? And then we're going to get into some of the nitty-gritty challenges, but thinking in terms of with those challenges, right, that parents have, family, friends, diagnosis, getting therapies, all of those things, you also have lots of new information, right? Lots of new information. And the new information is this, neurodiversity, neuroaffirming, and what does that mean, right? Everyone's claiming that they're doing neurodiverse inclusion strategies, and are you neuroaffirming, and does anyone know what that really means, right? And there's no necessarily black and white definition. It's kind of a deep concept, but it's a simple concept. And so I simplified it as much as possible to make it practical, because I do believe in practical strategies. And I think it's important for us to understand how things impact us in the real day-to-day going on. And I'll take a sip. All right, so when we look at this non-neuroaffirming, right? These are programs where the evidence doesn't necessarily include autistic voices, right? We now, thankfully, I remember when I had no access to autistic individuals, and now I do, right? Adults, right? That can tell us, right, about their childhood. So they should be included. And if they're not included, then we should say, not really sure. I need to look a little bit more into this. The other sort of key or flag or criteria for a program not being, or a method not being neuroaffirming is the goals are based on neuroconformative goals. And so I want to just really quickly give you an idea of what that looks like. And we'll talk about pushback on that when we go through the specifics. But when goals are things like neuroconformative goals, so I will use an example. where a child with cerebral palsy or a child who is visually impaired, they need to orient their body because they can't see. So they do a lot of moving, right? They do a lot of rocking, a lot of swinging. And a child with cerebral palsy may have cerebral palsy that causes spasms, right? Where they're trying to move and then they have these reactions that can be a little startling. We all accept that as that is who they are as a person who is visually impaired. We accept that's a person with cerebral palsy. So we don't make a goal for them not to do that. We don't make a goal for them to conform to sitting still because we know they need that, right? We don't make a goal for them to keep their arms and hands down when we know that spasms are part of the cerebral palsy and the way their nervous system works. But we do that with autistic individuals. And that's where the neuroaffirming, non-neuroaffirming comes into, of having a goal for a child to conform to something that works for people who are not autistic, but what works for the autistic individual, just like Angel said. So verbal may not be something that works for me right now, maybe not ever, but spelling does. Why do I have to conform to a neurotypical way of communicating when there is another way for me to communicate? And so those are things that we need to look at in terms of not being neuroaffirming when there's only one way, one goal, which is to do it the way everyone else does it, right? The purpose of non-neuroaffirming strategies are to expand on language, right? Which sounds like, we should expand on language. That's really important. But if you're asking an autistic individual to expand on language to make it look like someone who's not autistic, like Angel said, people don't understand our experience. It's going to be different, right? So the goals, the purpose of making it look like we communicate, those of us who are not autistic, is not really neuroaffirming, right? Improving on skills. When you see things like expand, improve, and cope, right? Those are all words that mean we're going to make you do it like we do it because it makes us more comfortable, right? Because the way you do it is wrong, right? I'm not saying we don't work on skills. I'm just sort of showing a little bit of a highlight of things that we need to explore a little bit when you see these written for your child, to ask what that really looks like. And some of the examples are things like social skills training, ABA, PBS, or punishment are non-neuroaffirming techniques. I think it's important for parents to educate themselves and decide what is best for their child and their family. And so looking into this, right, and understanding the difference. And when we look at neuroaffirming, the definition is you're supporting the autistic person's well-being and autonomy. The fact that Angel's mother is committed to being her communication partner so that her daughter can have autonomy over communicating what her ideas are is a beautiful thing. That's neuroaffirming. If her mom was not willing to do that and she would have to just communicate in a way that was convenient to others, then that would be really difficult and we would miss out on all of the information and insight that Angel has at age 10, and who knows what she'll have to offer as she gets older. The purpose of looking at neuroaffirming ways of working with autistic individuals is we have to start looking at human rights because they've been violated, and they still are. And it's important for autistic individuals to have their self-determination, right? We need to have things that are trauma-informed and based on consent, not compliance. And I know we hear all these words, right? Compliance, compliance, consent, consent. And, people say things like, oh, they need to be in the real world. Well, the real world is there when they're children. They're still in the real world. And as we grow, we learn strategies to accommodate ourselves, and we can have autonomy to go and do things in a way that makes it comfortable for us, for autistic individuals. So that compliance of doing things and you're uncomfortable is dangerous, right? Because that's how kids become victims because they comply no matter what discomfort that they're experiencing. And that's not what we want either. And it goes against human rights for anyone to have to be extremely uncomfortable on a daily basis to navigate a world that was not designed for them. An example of neuroaffirming is accepting and appreciating autistic communication and autistic play, right? All play should be accepted. There is no right way to play. There is no right way to do pretend play. Pretend play is whatever your pretend play is in your head. And I think that accepting that makes a huge difference for the autistic individual, a huge difference. So just wanted to kind of throw that out there because I do think it's important for parents to dig so that they know what they want for their child, what they're looking for, and what they're not looking for. All right. So I have to share a little bit of autistic perspective, and Audubon is always producing some really great, I guess, infograms. I don't know, whatever we call these social media posts. But I wanted to just have this as part of the slide, and I will just kind of read to you. It says fake neuroaffirming, right? That's when you hear things like, oh, no, we don't target things like eye contact and hand flapping anymore. We know how harmful that can be for individuals with neurodiversity. We even got rid of our puzzle piece stuff. But we still focus on other STEMs and social skills and tolerating distress and sensory desensitization, right? So this is sort of like a play on, oh, we're not doing those two things, right? Eye contact and hand flapping. We're not working on that anymore. We're just working on getting rid of the other things because that's what we're told, right? And so that's not really neuroaffirming. A STEM is a STEM, and it should be able to they should be allowed to STEM. You shouldn't take it away unless it's harmful, and that's very, very rare. Real neuroaffirming is when you hear the words like, we aim to help a person understand how their particular brain and body work and how to work with that instead of against it, how to accommodate themselves and advocate for their needs in a world not built for them, and basically just make sure that they know it's okay to be different, right? So that's the message we want for that neuroaffirming, inclusive culture to be present. And in order for that to happen, we have to support parents, right? So parents want this, but they're not able to get support so that they can support their children so their children can have this in the future. And that's where I think parents knowing what their challenges are, knowing where to ask those questions, and just being upfront with, I need supports too. Because if parents are supported, then children can be supported, and it's a win-win for our community. It's a win-win. All right, so what parents do supports need? Need support from family, right? It'd be great if grandparents would get on board. They're tough. They're really tough. Grandparents are great, but they're tough because, let me tell a story. I'll tell a story for context. My youngest son was born, and I kept saying, there's something not right with his eyes. His eyes don't look like they're working together. And my mother, of course, a proud grandmother, said, there's nothing wrong with that baby's eyes. My baby's eyes are perfect. So time goes on, I'm watching, I'm talking to the pediatrician, and I'm thinking, something's just not, like, I think we need to look more into this, right? Well, fast forward, after my mother repeatedly said, there's nothing wrong with that baby's eyes. He's had 2 surgeries, and he has to have 1 more when he gets to be 35, and he's got vision issues, right? But he had surgery. He has been able to do everything that he's wanted to do. But grandparents just, their grandbabies are perfect. And autism doesn't mean they're not perfect, but from their perspective, it means something's wrong. So it's hard for them to be supportive sometimes. Sometimes you get lucky and they're all on board. And other times you got to sort of bring them on slowly. And this is what I tell parents. You model what you want. You find one family member that'll come on board with you, and other family members will either join you or they're just going to be left out. Like, that's the way it is. And I'm not saying that we need to avoid family, but we certainly don't need to put our children in situations that are traumatizing. And sometimes family can be the trauma. It's frustrating and it's difficult. But if anyone here is a grandparent, if anyone here is going to sit down and watch the replay with a grandparent, I will say to all grandparents, aunts and uncles, please, please give the parent of your autistic family member a little grace. Ask them what you can do to help. And sometimes we just have to keep things to ourselves, right? Because their experience is different than your experience, and it can be tough. The other support, that parents need are a friend. Like, everyone needs a friend. A friend can be another parent you met. A friend can be your child's therapist, which, then they can't be your therapist anymore. But, sometimes it ends up that way and you have to switch therapists. The key is every parent, mom, dad, caregiver needs someone that they can just lean on. And it's not always you have to go with a mission. You have to go with, this is how I'm feeling. You have to go with, this is what I need you to do for me. Sometimes you just need to sit with someone and cry because you're tired. Sometimes you need to sit with someone just to sit with them because you're overwhelmed and know that somebody just is there for you. That's it. Sometimes that's all you need. Sometimes it's 15 minutes in the car talking to your best friend, laughing about nothing. All right. The other thing that I wanted to point out in terms of what parents need support around is, and I specifically put this picture, which is not one of my favorite pictures, but guys, brothers, men, uncles, but dads. Dads need support. But I will say this to dads, you got to say something. Like, a lot of times dads need support. They don't want to say anything. Mom knows they need support. They invite dad. They kind of nudge dad. I've even had dads say, hey, I want to meet other dads. I get the dads together, put them in a group sort of communication. Nobody says anything. So dads, you need support. I need you to acknowledge you need support, and I need you to ask for support from a friend, from your spouse, from another guy, another dad. You just got to say, I need support. It's okay. We don't always have all the answers. All right, so I wanted to take a quick pause, and I would really, this is going to be useful for later in the presentation, but I would really appreciate it if everyone could sit and think for a few minutes. Ooh, I should put on some music. Think for a few minutes about a current challenge you are having at home and write it in the chat. If you do not feel comfortable and you need autonomy, just put it in the chat directly to me or to Claire. Maybe to Claire, because she can read it. You can just directly do it to Claire and then she can read it because it will be used later. So I'm going to see if I can do this handy dandy timer. I will give 5 minutes. I'll give 5 minutes. This is a good time for a little 5-minute. Think about. Just think about. It doesn't have to be anything massive, but even if you think about trying to get here today, trying to sit and listen to this, right? Is there a challenge that you had or something during the week? This is your opportunity to get individualized support. So I'm going to stop talking and let you think on that. And Claire, I can't see your chat, so I won't know. Oh, that would be great, Claire. Yes, the in-person folks, please do write it on a piece of paper. Thank you. So I said I was not going to talk, This is what I want these. First of all, I want everyone to be able to get a chance to have a dilemma solved. And then what I want to do is I'll talk about a little bit of it at the end or towards the end of the presentation. But I also want to make a handout with all of the challenges and dilemmas that everyone had, and then give some suggestions, and then have that as a resource that everyone gets so that you can learn from one another, because I think it's helpful. You may have a challenge this week that someone else had 2 years ago, right? And so you can learn. And if no one has challenges, then don't be shy.
We're giving everyone 5 minutes, Stacy.
I know. It's so horrible. I'm going to mute myself. Terrible. Where is my mute? There it is. "90 seconds. Ten more seconds. These are so good. Ready.
Time's up.
Oh, that was aggressive. All right.
Okay, Stacy. Do you want me to read them all at once, or are you going to go through them one at a time?
No, there's actually a part in the slide where they're going to come up that I'm going to come back. That I'm going to, like, they're going to be built into the slide.
Okay, okay,
Right.
okay. I get you. All right. I understand. Bye.
No. Thank you for asking, though. I'm doing something a little different this time, a little different. Okay, so thank you all for your input, and you guys have some really good stuff. I'm excited. All right, so what I'm going to do is I am going to go through challenges that I know parents have and some examples and give some suggestions. And that'll give you some ideas of either maybe questions you have later, but also give you some ideas on things that you can do. And then we're going to go into some more of the specific things that you all wrote in the chat. So communication is one of the biggest challenges parents have with their child in terms of, I don't know what my child wants. I don't know how my child feels. I don't know what my child needs, right? These are all challenges that are not from the outside. These are going to be challenges that, as a parent of an autistic kiddo, these are the things that you need support around. And so many autistic individuals communicate very differently, and that's a challenge for parents, especially if you are a parent that is not autistic, or you're a parent that is autistic and you're a verbal communicator. If you communicate verbally and that's your primary way of communicating, it's hard to sort of navigate that someone like your child, right, is going to communicate with you differently. And I will just share with everyone, I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but in the deaf community, there are so many non-hearing sign language communicating children that are born to hearing parents, and their parents never learn sign language. They never learn to communicate with their child. They always do it through the sibling who learns sign language, because kids, will learn anything new. But it's sad to watch because they have no relationship. You can't have a relationship if you're not communicating. Apologize. So for parents, it's difficult because you don't know what to do. You don't know what supports your child needs. You don't know what you should be doing to help understand your child. And if you don't have someone supporting you, if you don't have a good speech therapist, it is challenging. I often tell parents, you have to learn the culture of your child's autistic communication. And I think Angel's mother, I'm not sure if she said it during the recording or before we started, but she mentioned that, right? It's like understanding how she communicates differently, the culture of her autistic communication, and what can I do to support her? So an example I have is child is non-speaking and they are frustrated. Parents are frustrated. The child is frustrated. We have meltdowns, right? The parents are like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. They won't point at the pictures. They won't use their device. I don't know what to do. Very, very frustrating. And this usually starts before a diagnosis, right? For some families, it's like that leads to them even looking for a diagnosis. So this is what I will say is the strategy for this challenge. One, you have to develop a different way of your child communicating. You have to provide that different way, and you have to accept that alternative method and not sort of rely on this is only until they're verbal, right? Because that'll make it easier for them, for me, for everyone. If a person is going to be a verbal communicator, that is going to evolve, right? But we can't wait for that. We have to provide another way to communicate because it is so frustrating. It's so frustrating. When Angel talked about just the idea of people not understanding that her using spelling as a method of communication and the wonderful words that she communicated to us. Can you imagine how frustrated she would be if she didn't have a way to communicate that to us? Can you imagine being 10 years old and you have no way to communicate all these brilliant ideas that you have? Children have ideas. Autistic individuals have something to say, to communicate. So we have to provide a way. And the earlier we start, the easier, of course, because anything started when kids are little makes it easier. But you have to buy into, I'm going to develop, provide, and accept a different way of communication. And whatever evolves, evolves. I'm not saying you can't have a speech therapist work on speech, But that's not something that is possible for those who have motor planning or apraxia, right? And then the body disconnect. And you need to make sure that you're providing something else while they are learning, right? Whether they're going to become verbal or not. Being a verbal communicator may make it easier, but it's not an indication that you can only do things if you're verbal. There are so many non-speaking individuals, whether they're hearing impaired or autistic, that are doing all kinds of things, right? Paying their bills like everybody else, going to work like everybody else, and arguing with their spouse like everybody else, right? They just communicate differently, and it's okay. So my strategy for the communication challenge is develop, provide, and accept a different way when verbal is not reliable, right? Because even verbal communicators, it's not always reliable. Don't just, and let me go back to this, because one of the things that I hear a lot, and I probably can say it's kind of a pet peeve is, I hear a lot of, oh, my child's non-speaking, nonverbal. My child's non-speaking, they're nonverbal. Okay, so does that mean we're not doing anything to provide a way to communicate? Like, those are the initial things that I have. I will say, though, in the defense of parents, this is a challenge because no one's giving you the information you need. No one's telling you about the AAC devices. No one's telling you about spelling, or it's not accessible in your area. No one's telling you about using pictures or the free communication apps that you can use on your phone. No one's giving parents the information. And so that's why I'm glad everyone's here, because they do have a lot of options. It's a wonderful time, to be disabled because of technology. It's amazing what we can do with technology. So communication is key, and we can do things to support the communication. All right, this is the one that is maybe the second most frustrating in terms of hygiene, right? Like, oh my gosh, I can't get my child to brush their teeth. They hate getting their teeth brushed. My child will not get their hair washed, right? Challenges with hygiene, there are various reasons why. It can be sensory, it can be executive functioning. A lot of times you will get a behavior report that says, my child doesn't like doing non-preferred activities, right? Like brushing their teeth. So first of all, none of us like doing non-preferred activities. That's why they're non-preferred. I do not like mopping. I don't like mopping. I do not like mopping, right? It is a non-preferred activity. So I have two choices: look at my dirty floor or mop it at some point. Third choice, hire someone else to mop it, right? Those are my choices. But I don't like it, right? So when we hear about the non-preferred, I put this here because I only hear this when we talk about autistic kids. Non-preferred. All kids have non-preferred activities they don't want to do, right? The reason our children push back on things like brushing their teeth, getting their hair cut, getting their nails cut, having to take a bath versus having to take a shower is because it is not sensory safe for them, or they do not have the executive functioning or the motor planning skills to do it at that time. Yes, maybe they brush their hair, brush their teeth 3 weeks in a row. Well, today's Tuesday. The moon and the stars are not allowing them to be able to get that done. Yes, it's going to be frustrating. So when we think about those challenges, I like to think of hygiene tasks as, so it's a non-preferred activity, but why? Why? Why is it a struggle? Have we done a sensory profile? Are we supporting their sensory needs? Are we doing the strategies to help them get their teeth brushed? Are we finding alternative ways for them to get their teeth clean? We have to give our children grace. We have to prepare. And that sometimes can be taxing, but once you get used to it and you know what to do, it becomes easier. One of the things that I really appreciated from Angel and her mom was the fact that her mom recognized she needs a little grace around communication, right? It's not that speaking verbally is non-preferred. It's not that she doesn't want to communicate. No one doesn't not want to communicate. Some people don't have a lot to say and they're introverts, but Everyone has something they need to communicate or want to communicate. So thinking in terms of looking outside of ourselves and saying, what do I have to do in order to help my child with these hygiene tasks? And why is it so uncomfortable? Now, there are some non-negotiables when it comes to sensory challenges, right? We have to take our medicine. It's not fun to have to force medicine down, especially when we know it's a sensory challenge for our kiddo, but medicine sometimes has to supersede when children are sick. And brushing your teeth is important because you need healthy teeth to not get sick. Washing your hair is important, but there's so many other ways to get your hair clean now. There's 500 million things on the market to clean your hair if the traditional way doesn't work in terms of sink, hairdresser, whatever it is that we're used to. So I say this to say the challenge of getting hygiene tasks done are look at their sensory needs, find out what sensory supports you can put in place. And visual schedules help, social stories can be helpful. However, it's really figuring out what is the glitch. Is it executive functioning? Is it sensory? And once we know that, we put supports in place and voila, it's done. Now, the nail cutting, it's a little tricky. It's a little tricky, but I will say brushing teeth, cutting hair, washing hair, all of those things that have to do with grooming, they are received as a sensory, unsafe, painful experience to many autistic individuals. So when your child is crying and you say, oh, it's not that bad, for them it is. Their sensory system is receiving messages that are very different than yours. And I'm not saying that for us to feel sorry for autistic individuals. It's understanding, giving grace, prepare, and then support. All right, setting limits. This is the one that this is that challenge of like, oh, I want to be accepting. I don't want to have a meltdown. Oh my gosh, what do I do? What do I do? Where do I balance it? Right? This is the challenge where accepting your child's autonomy while making sure they are respecting boundaries within the house as well as with friends and family. And friends feel like you let your child get away with everything. Right? You don't get away with it. You just let them do. You let them have their way. They just want to do what they want to do. Well, newsflash, everybody wants to do what they want to do. Everybody. There are lots of things that I want to do. I want to walk around barefoot with no socks on when I go to the store. That's what I like to do. I don't like to wear shoes. But we have a rule about, I don't know, shoes and clothes in the store. So I put them on, right? I want to do what I want to do. Everyone wants to do their choice. For our children, their choice, their want to do what they want to do is really about they are doing what they need to do to feel sensory safe. It's all about sensory safeness in their environments, because if you're sensory safe, you can communicate. If you're sensory safe, you're emotionally regulated. If you're sensory safe, you don't have anxiety. All of that revolves around the sensory. So an example is my child does not want to share their items with other kids when they come over. All right, this is pretty common, right? And then someone says, why don't you? They have to share. All of those people telling you how to parent your child. So I love the use of visuals. I love the use of specific items for when kids come over, and I love having a sensory space to go. So I will explain and share a story of a mom who has, she is a person that has a culture where they have large family events on a regular basis. I don't mean small, I mean large family events on a regular basis. So it was not working out that when things were done at her house and she was hosting, her kiddo was not sharing, melting down, didn't want the other kids to play with his things, right? Don't take those things out of line. So we came up with a strategy. We came up with a bin of toys that were the bin of toys that was for visitors. And we put a visual when friends come over. And that bin was the bin that was taken down when kids were over that could be played with by all the other kids. And other things that needed to be in order were not touched, right? Were not touched. So her autistic kiddo felt comfortable with like, okay, No one's going to break the rules because that's what autistic kids are thinking. It's not about not sharing. It's they don't know the rules on how to play with that. They don't know the rules of that being not in the right place in line. So that's why they're kind of like hovering over not wanting anyone to touch their things. There's a reason, right? For them, it gives comfort, it makes sense, and it's the way they play. So we have a specific items and we had a visual on the bin. The bin was never taken down when other kids weren't there. It was just for when kids came over. But she also had a sensory space, safe space for him to go. So when things got loud, lots of people talking, children running, everyone's all this smells of food, he had a place to go. And she explained this to everyone before, like when they came over, so that no one would say, oh, why is he not with us? Because right now he can't. He's done enough, right? His sensory system needs a break. He needs to go here. So these are situations where if we understand our child, we know what works for them, we can be proactive about putting things in place. And that way it won't have the dilemma around not sharing, what are you doing, parenting, all those things. Setting limits and boundaries involves structure, visuals, communicating to your child in a way that they can process, which usually is not verbal. All that verbal, words disappear. Poof, they go away as soon as we've said them. If they're still processing, they don't get the whole message. That's where the visuals, even writing it down. I write a lot of stuff down as well for kids that can read. All right. This is one that everybody's familiar with because everybody talks about behaviors when it comes to autism. And I do understand that there are challenging behaviors that occur, but remember, autism is not a behavior disorder. Those challenging behaviors are a result of, like Angel said, the environment's not designed for us. The world is not designed for us. People who can't walk get a wheelchair, crutches, or a prosthetic to walk because the world was not designed for people who cannot walk on two legs. But we put things in place for them, and we need to do the same for autistic individuals. So when parents have this struggle of a new behavior, right? It's like, what is this from? Are we setting boundaries? Is it developmentally appropriate? Do all kids do this? Is this the way my child is? Like, what is this all about, right? And a lot of times, my example, parents struggle with determining when to discipline their child because the diagnosis is in the forefront. It's like we think about autism, and we're looking for the connection. And sometimes that's just what kids do at age 6 and 7, or that's what 2-year-olds do. Or as one of my parents said to me, I think my child is just an asshole and it has nothing to do with autism. I said, well, my podcast hosts, who is autistic, said autistic individuals have every capability like everyone else to be not nice, right? Just because you're autistic doesn't mean you're going to be a nice person. So it's difficult for parents to figure out how to approach these behaviors when you're looking, especially from that neuro-affirming lens of, I want them to have autonomy. I want them to be able to participate. I don't want them to not follow boundaries and rules, but I also want them to have what they need, right? And I think that it's important. This is something that is not an easy solution, right? Because it's very, very individualized in terms of setting boundaries. And I say all the time to my parents, setting boundaries and, discipline and whatever guidelines you have in your household, you have to do things differently for each of your children if you have more than one. Doesn't matter. Autism really doesn't have anything to do with the fact that you have to change and shift, right? Some of your children one of your children may respond really well to, they're going to have a negative consequence, right? They're going to lose a privilege. That's important to them. Another one may be like, well, whatever. That's not autism specific, right? That's just parenting. Parenting, we have to make adjustments. So in order to tackle those behavior challenges and to know whether it's about you saying no, whether it's about, is this what all kids their age do, whether it's that's just my child's personality, you need to know your child. And the hardest part is You cannot compare them to any other child. It is hard, but you have to say, oh, I can't compare them to my son, can't compare them to my daughter, can't compare them to my niece and nephew. And it's not because they're autistic. It's because all human beings are different. We're all different. Everyone is different. Personalities, growth, everyone is different. So talk to other parents so that you can know, this seems to be what all kids are doing at age 6 and 7. This is not something I need to bring a big old strategy around, right? And I say that because a lot of times parents will message me and say, oh my gosh, Stacy, we have a new thing. And I'm like, okay, so how many times did this new thing happen? Oh, it'll happen twice. Okay, so are we alarmed? Well, I just want to get on top of it. Well, maybe it's nothing to get on top of. It's just what kids do. It's what they did twice. It's no big deal, right? But because we have a diagnosis, we're looking at everything as a behavioral challenge. And sometimes it's just your kid's personality, and sometimes it's just what all kids developmentally at that age do. I mean, teenagers are not fun. They're just not fun. They're just not fun for parents, for other teens, maybe. All right. This brings me into the next challenge, which is about discipline, right? Parents struggle knowing when and what to discipline. Others pass judgment, and it becomes really stressful, right? So thinking in terms of a very common one is children on technology for many hours a day, and people saying technology is harmful. Aunt Mary saying, get them off of technology. And someone else saying they shouldn't be homeschooling on technology. You know your child. You know what your child needs. So be proactive, advocate for their supports. And sometimes we have to avoid those that don't sort of are in line with the way we're disciplining our children. But an example of disciplining your child is you should be able to back up and advocate why you've made a decision if you feel you need to explain yourself. Personally, I don't think we have to explain ourselves. It's your child. You can make decisions about your child, right, wrong, and different. It's your child. However, we do sometimes have family members and friends who don't understand. And technology can be very sensory regulating for a lot of autistic individuals, especially when they get home from school where they've been masking all day masking. It's exhausting. So all they want to do is come home and be on their computer, their gaming device, their iPad for hours. Let them regulate. It's going to be fine. And the reality is we live in a technology world. We can say we don't like it. We can say we hate it. We can say it's going to be the death of us, and maybe it will. But this is the way we function. Everything is technology based. You don't see folks outside playing in the backyard, right? It's very rare. Used to be kids were freely riding their bikes with no parent supervision. You don't see that as much. So there's a lot of parent-child togetherness that doesn't have to be engaging all the time. Technology is okay. You know your child. Be proactive. If you know 3 hours of technology straight is going to cause them to be dysregulated, then put a timer on it and put a break in between and make sure they do sensory activities, right? And I'm saying technology because it's something that comes up all the time, right? Technology, why they're on technology. There's reasons. There's reasons why our children are gravitating to technology. You have to know your child. You have to be proactive about setting limits, but you also have to advocate for the supports if it's something they need. I say to everyone and remind parents, children in general do not enjoy going out to eat. That is not a child-centered activity. That's an adult-centered activity. Charge up your technology, plug it in, let them do what they need to do. If you want to sit and enjoy a couple of glasses of wine or laughing with your spouse or friends, it is not a child activity. So there's no reason to expect children to sit quietly during a dinner. It's just not fun. They're children. So technology is okay, right? I mean, we live in a different world now where people go out to eat more often than we did before. All right, I'm going to move on from that one because this one is a really good one. And I've already seen some examples in the chat in terms of parents feel that the other children in the household are not getting enough attention, or that everything focuses around the disabled sibling. And this is what I say. Be honest and speak the truth. So I'm going to give Stacy's version of this is life. When we are living together as a family, stuff happens that we may not expect. Family is about making adjustments, and sometimes one family member needs more attention than another family member. We're not always going to have equal of everything and every child get exactly everything the same. You may have one of your children that needs more time for 5 years, and then later another one of your child needs more attention in their adult life or their teen life, right? So I think that talking about things openly can decrease this guilt that a lot of parents feel. And if you have a child that is feeling like they're left out, talk about that, right? Ask them what they want. Because the reality is this, if you have a parent, let's just say a scenario where let's not even think about autism, right? You got mom, dad, 2 kids, and a dog, right? Whatever that scenario is that we see on commercials. Dad gets diagnosed with cancer and has to go through treatment. What happens? The family adjusts. Who gets the attention? The dad. Guess what? That's life. Talk about it. Because when we don't talk about it is when everybody feels resentment, but talk about it. So an example is, spending so much time bringing the child to therapy, especially when they're little. There's no time for the other sibling. These are my suggestions to parents. Besides talking about it, right? Because communication is important. Ask the other child what they want. Children really don't want a lot. A little bit goes a long way for them, right? They really like a lot of autonomy. Be open and honest during those discussions and make time once a week for that child. They don't need a lot. They just need to know that you remember they're there. Just, just need whatever. And every kid's different. Some kids are like, fine, whatever. I don't really need anything from you. But thinking of, let me give some examples. I have a mom and she has a 12-year-old daughter and she remarried and had a baby. And the baby is an autistic individual. And she has all of these things that she's bringing him to because he is sort of little and early intervention. And she arranged for her and her daughter to have coffee out on the patio every Saturday morning and go through Instagram because they both like sharing Instagram pictures of cats or dogs or something. And dad stays with the little one in the house or brings him for a walk to the park. So that's their time, right? It's 30 minutes. You don't need a lot, right? Now, I say this to say we can't control how all of our children feel, right? Some kids are more needy than others. Some kids are more selfish than others. That's not anything we can fix as parents, but we can talk about it and just ask them. You'd be surprised that your children tell you what they want. Sometimes it's like, well, I just want to be included. I want to know what I can do to help with this communication. You're bringing him to therapy and bringing him, but no one ever tells me what I can do to help my brother or sister, right? Ask them. A little bit of time goes a long way. It really does. And sibling challenge is another one that I wanted to talk about. I know it comes up in one of the questions we're going to address, but sort of that sharing and accommodating. And I'll address that when we get to that question. All right, this is my favorite, least favorite, least favorite. Academic skills. Another challenge parents have is getting accurate information on their child's academic skills, where they are, what they can do, what they're struggling with, what can I help them with, because standardized assessments do not, typo, account for communication differences. So when I say that, what I mean is when I talk to parents and they call me and they're struggling with the school and feeling like their child is not making progress, and I ask a parent, what is your child's reading level? And they say, I don't know. And I ask, well, what did the school tell you? They haven't told me anything. That's important information. That's important information to know where your child's reading level is. And it is the responsibility of the school to provide you with that information because they are the education system that's supposed to assess that, drive that, and help your child grow. So if you don't know what your child can do academically, then you don't know how to help them, you don't know how to advocate for them, and you don't know how you can support them. And what schools tend to tell you is what they can't do. Well, they can't do this. You go to IEP meeting, you get an evaluation. All they tell you is all these things your children can't do. What can your child do? Your child can do a lot. You know they can do a lot. They do a lot on their own at home. Got kids breaking into, hacking into computers, changing the language, right? Kids are going on to laptops and iPads and doing all kinds of things. So we know there's a lot they can do. It is important for parents to know, but it is a challenge for many parents because they don't know because no one's telling them. The challenge is that parents know their child well and they know a lot of what their child can demonstrate. However, the school sees it differently. So I tell parents, collect evidence. If you need to, ask for an outside evaluation. Collect evidence. Videotape your kid reading. Videotape your child putting together something intricate and saying, you all keep saying he can't do this. Maybe he needs supports to do this particular fine motor activity, but he seems to do this very well. So you can bring evidence with video, with pictures, write it down, what they did, right? I saw a post on social media. I think someone's kid was singing and they said a few words and they're like, oh, I'm so glad I videotaped this because now I can show the therapist, the speech therapist, look, he can sing and words are coming out, right? Collect evidence. They only see your children in a certain situation where there's a lot of sensory overwhelm. Therapy is very structured, unlike home. So academic skills, it's important to know where your child is academically. But I think a lot of times the information that you have as an expert or your expert on your kiddo, share that with the school, let them know, show them the evidence, and find a way, right, to determine where your child is academically. And when I say that, I don't mean numbers, right? I don't mean like, oh, they know 25% sight words. What can they do? They can read directions if we highlight. They can point to, they can do this, right? We need to know those things so that we know what supports to put in place. The other struggle for parents is around the fine motor skills. I'm finding that parents are not being provided with occupational therapy services. No one's bringing up occupational therapy as an assessment when children are diagnosed. In the schools, occupational therapy is not done the way it used to be done, and it's no longer clinical. So children are not getting the sensory profiles and sensory support they need. They're not getting the fine motor support in order to do handwriting or eliminate handwriting altogether and put in technology support. Parents struggle with getting their child to complete self-help tasks, and this prevents independence. This is not on parents. This is on the professionals that you rely on to give you this information. So ask questions. Why is my child not able to do this? What can we do to support them, right? And the other thing I always say is everything's not supposed to be accomplished. Every person doesn't have to do everything. If you cannot tie shoes ever for your entire life, guess what? You're going to be okay. You can still work. There's shoes with no shoestrings. There's shoestrings that are fancy, push a button. There's alternatives. Tying shoes is something somebody put on a list in a culture that has privilege that said everyone needs to know how to do this by age 5. There are countries where people don't have shoestrings in their shoes, and the children manage to grow and develop just fine. So it is not a critical life skill. We have other shoe alternatives. And the other thing I say is, whatever you can't do, as you get older, what you can't do, you get a job so you make enough money to pay someone to do it for you. Marry someone who cooks if you can't cook. So it doesn't mean, these fine motor skill tasks, these checklists, these criterias, there's too much pressure on parents for their kids to do all these things, and they keep telling you they can't do it, they're not doing it, they're not doing it. Some of it they don't need to do. Let's focus on the things they need to do, right? If they can't button because they have hand strength that is not where it needs to be, or fine motor coordination, or apraxia or dyspraxia, just buy pants they can pull up that don't need a button. Seriously, there's so many ways around this. Put individualized supports in place for your child to succeed. And I put the reminder for me to tell the shoe story because there's an autistic gentleman that always says, I'm a speaker, I'm autistic, I can't tie my shoes and I can't drive, but I'm working and I'm living independently. He just wears different shoes. And maybe one day he'll marry someone that can tie his shoes. You know, doesn't prevent him from being who he's supposed to be in this world. So when it comes to fine motor, the challenges that you're having, ask your child's therapist. Ask them as to why. What are the supports? There are so many things your occupational therapist has access to or can purchase within the school for your child's IEP for your child to get support around fine motor. It does not have to be the child has to master this with an 85% and do it like everyone else. They're autistic. Their fine motor planning may be different. That's okay. Just put supports in place, but you need to understand why. And I put this because it's a struggle for parents because parents are overwhelmed with trying to get their children to dress themselves to go to school, to pack their backpack, to put their things away. And no one's telling them why they're not able to do that and what you can do to support it, right? That's what we need. That's the information we need. So I'm going to tell you what you can do to support it. Visual schedules. Visual schedules are not just for babies. Visual schedules are not just pictures. Visual schedules give the autistic person the concept of knowing what to expect, what's next, and when I'm finished. You can make one, they can make one, you can write it, you can print it, you can Velcro it, you can put it on technology, doesn't really matter. It is a way to communicate what to expect and when you're done and what's next. Very simple. All the verbal, I'm a talker. I do not talk as much with my autistic students because it's too much to process, right? So the visuals are very helpful. Visual schedules are the things that tell you what's next, where you're going. Visual supports are things that tell you what to do when you get there. So let's say that the scenario is your child has a visual schedule and it says it's time to do their homework. So they go to the table where they do their homework, and then you have a visual support that has a checklist that reminds them of what they need to do their homework, or you have a visual support that reminds them what they need to complete, or you have a visual support that has their multiplication facts, so they can go to that when they're doing their math. We're not supposed to memorize everything. Supports. Not cheating if you have a support. We all look at a recipe. Every Thanksgiving, you make the same pie, you bring out the recipe, you know it's 3 cups, but you look to make sure it's 3 cups because you want to make sure you know what to expect, what you're doing, and it's just helpful, right? So it's not a crutch, it's a support. Another solution that's very important is sensory supports. I cannot stress how much supporting your child's sensory needs is so important. So important. If you're not regulated, if your sensory system is dysregulated, you cannot communicate. You cannot complete a task. You cannot follow directions. It's very, very hard because you have to attend to your sensory system. So sensory supports are important. You can get that from your child's sensory profile, and whoever did the profile can put a plan together. You can ask that of your school or your private occupational therapist because it's very individualized. Communication support. If you want to minimize a lot of challenges, get a method of communication in place. Start baby steps. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be drastic, but get away. Try things. There's so many things we can try. We have access to so many things now. I just feel like there's no excuse. I mean, before we didn't have access. Now we have access. Another sort of important solution is routines implemented with consistency. And I know a lot of people don't like routines, oh, I like to go with the flow. I like to, well, when you have children, going with the flow doesn't always work. When you have an autistic child that needs routines that need to be implemented, it helps if you do it with consistency. That doesn't mean your child's not going to learn flexibility. That's what the visual supports are for. That's what the visual schedules are for. That's what sensory support is for, to help with those transitions when things change. But when you have things that are routine, that are implemented routinely with consistency, that will eliminate a lot of challenges. It's really, it's always very interesting to me, as long as I've been doing this, how little things out of order can really throw off an autistic kiddo, even an adult. Little things like the blue chair is not next to the green chair, like dad picked me up from school instead of mom. Like we had to go pick up my sister from soccer practice instead of going to the house where we always go because I get my sensory regulation because I've been masking all day. When those routines are thrown off, it gets them a little bit of a quandary, right? But if you have your visual supports, if you communicate visually and you have sensory regulation in place, then you don't have those challenges. The other one, or the last one that I will recommend, is an important one in terms of if you're parenting a kiddo that is autistic, ADHD, you have to embrace that things may look different than expected. You have to embrace that. If you keep fighting it, you're going to exhaust yourself and nothing is going to resolve, right? So you have to go with it, make adjustments, and there's a balance, right? I'm not saying you have to do everything in terms of nothing in your life can be the same. I'm saying you have to make adjustments and more things can be available to you to do as a parent if you put all these things in place, embrace that it's okay if it looks different, and then it's all good. I mean, just the fact that was my timer that I needed to be at this point at this time, so I'm excited. So thinking in terms of what we saw with Angel and her mom and how her mom embraced something like communication looking different. And not only does her daughter benefit, but the mom benefits because she has a relationship with her daughter. She gets to know her daughter. We all benefited because she had something very important to say and she shared very important insight with us. So I'm glad that they embraced sometimes things look different and usually it's communication. All right, so remember, the most important things to remember when a new challenge occurs is, do you have routines? Did you follow the routine? Did you forget something? Okay, lesson learned. Did you have a visual support? Can you pull up a visual support on your phone really quick and show the change in the schedule? Did you have communication accessible, right? Oh, darn, I forgot to communicate that. It's all right. We learn, right? When we make mistakes, that's how we learn. Sensory supports. I have to share a story of this family. I was in a coaching session and we're on Zoom and the dad's talking to me and I told him, look into my screen window and I want you, don't turn around, but I want you to see what your child's doing. The child was stacking up these things and getting ready to jump off onto a beanbag. And when they did that, the dad immediately said, I forgot to do his sensory activity this morning. I said, well, he found a way to get it in, right? He needed it. It wasn't provided. His son decided, I'm going to support my own sensory needs, right? But what do we typically do? Oh my gosh, he's stacking things. Oh, dad forgot to do sensory support, which was a good reminder. Sometimes when we make mistakes, we really learn. It sticks with us. And the other thing that I always tell parents is whenever you have a new challenge, think of how can I structure the environment to avoid this happening again? What visual support can I put in place to avoid this happening again? What different routine? Maybe we should do math before we do reading to avoid this happening again, right? So think about what you can do. Sometimes it's frustrating and challenges will be there. That's part of life. But if you have the tools, if you have the understanding, if you know how to support your child, then it's easier to take on those challenges. Hopefully that makes sense. I know I'm saying it like, oh, it's so easy. It's easy when you know, and it's a process to know. You're learning along with your kiddo. You're not supposed to know it all right out the bat. You're learning. So coming to events like this, talking to other parents, finding out what others are doing, what's the new stuff available. This is how we can eliminate a lot of those parent challenges. But I will say, I do also think that we need to get our communities to provide more for parents to be supported. I truly believe that if parents had better support, because in some areas parents do, and they don't have as many challenges, right? So it just depends on where you live, but also what you have access to. So we need to do better now that we know better. All right. So we're going to look at those questions. And Claire, I will start. I'm watching the time. I will start with the ones that I can see in the chat. Is that okay? All right.
Yeah, sure. You can start with the ones you can see, and then before I read the anonymous chat ones, we'll do some of the in-room people as well.
Perfect. All right. So one of the things that someone mentioned was the challenge of their kiddo having lots of dysregulation and not feeling like they're doing enough. And I can envision this in terms of a lot of times parents will say, oh my gosh, my child's stimming a lot. They're moving a lot. They're moving and moving. I feel like they're never regulated. Remember, when they're stimming, when they're moving, when they're jumping, when they're flapping, when they're running around, driving you crazy, they are regulating. They just need it at that time. Now, we can always say, okay, what do we need to change in the environment? Sometimes we don't realize that the television in the other room is distracting auditorily. Sometimes we don't realize that everyone talking at the dinner table is very overwhelming for an autistic child. So they are going to do a lot of things that make them seem dysregulated. But if they have access to what they need, sometimes you don't have to know what they need every minute, just provide access. So if your kid gets up in the middle of, I'll use an example. I homeschool kiddos, and sometimes one of my students will just get up, jump up, and flop over the chair and start spinning on the chair, right? I just keep teaching. That's it. We just roll with it, right? He has access to it. We can keep teaching. He's learning because he's regulated. So I think that sometimes we feel that when our kids are seeking lots of input, that they're dysregulated, but they're just maintaining their regulation at that time, right? In order to participate, to communicate, to engage in the completion of a task. So it's not always so alarming. It's only alarming if they're melting down because they don't have access to what regulates them. So just keep in mind, when your child appears dysregulated and they're always moving and seeking, then it's great if they have access. Only if it's like causing them to not be able to participate do we need to look at, all right, are we need to do an updated sensory plan, or maybe we need to shift the way we do our routine during the day. This is my favorite one because I love sibling dynamics. Sister wants to know how to compromise with him due to his rigid thinking. All right, so this is my stance on sibling dynamics. If an autistic child has a sibling, I think it's great because siblings by default are how we learn what we can do and not do to keep a relationship, right? In terms of siblings can fight, but then they're siblings, right? Siblings go back and forth, but they're siblings. And you learn and you make adjustments, right? Because your sibling is usually the most honest with you. I mean, they're really usually the most honest. And there's also a role in siblings. The oldest gets to be the bossy one. The youngest one gets to torture everyone. That's just the dynamics of siblings. So when it comes to the compromising and due to rigid thinking, the reason I love this question is because often siblings, especially if they're girls and they're older, by default, because of their nurturing older sister, loving their sibling, they over accommodate and never do what they want to do because they want their other younger sibling who's autistic to be happy, right? I'm using that as a generalization, but siblings have a right to take a stand and say, I don't want to do that right now. But you can structure it in a way that the autistic sibling can receive it, by making the guidelines beforehand, proactively. So I'll share a story which hopefully will help you come up with some ideas for your daughter and her autistic sibling. I had mom, older sister, maybe by 2 years, and younger brother. The daughter loved playing with her dollhouse. Well, her brother was into soldiers. So he wanted to play with her, but he only wanted to play with the dollhouse with the soldiers. Well, she didn't always want the soldiers, but she kept allowing him to put the soldiers in, but then she would be really mad because she wanted to use her dolls. So we came up with a schedule of turn taking. When you guys play together today, she gets to choose who goes in the dollhouse. When you play together tomorrow, you get to choose. You make a routine, you visually communicate that, you stick with it with consistency, and it's amazing. Autistic individuals are really good at following rules when they're communicated in a way they can process. Sometimes we have to be careful about the rules because they can hold on to them and not let go. But thinking in terms of just because an autistic sibling needs things a certain way, it doesn't mean that the other sibling can't advocate for themselves and say, I'd like to choose sometimes. How do we find a balance, right? I always encourage families to have family meetings once a week. I think that's really helpful because you can express your grievances, problem solve, and move on. There's always a solution. All right. Then I have, oh, this is hard. My 15-year-old echoes a lot, and it's difficult for the other family members. They don't seem to get that that's part of their symptomology, interrupt a lot. So verbal stimming, verbal outburst can be super annoying for those of us who are not autistic, right? And it's so funny, it just popped in my head. My son works with adults that are autistic, and he actually sent me a message and said, Mom, can I be annoyed by an autistic person? I said, you have every right to be annoyed by any individual, right? Just as the autistic person has a right to be annoyed by whatever annoys them. Just because a person is autistic doesn't mean you have to let them annoy you, crap all over you, push you around. That's not what we're saying. We're saying, how do we find the balance? So for kiddos that do verbal stim, verbal outburst, we have to do a little bit of accommodating on both sides. I have 2 moms that wear noise canceling earbuds. They can't tolerate the verbal stim. I have a mom who's autistic. Her son is autistic. He needs to verbal stim. She can't take the sensory input. She wears her noise canceling headphones. So parents can wear noise canceling to muffle the noise, or you can go to another room. Another is you can have your child, if the child's 15, I had a nephew when he did his verbal stims. If I could not process it myself, I would just tell him, do I need to go to another room, or do you need to go do that somewhere else? That's family. We're in the house together. We've got to figure out how to live together. So you can have designated places, but that doesn't mean you have to always send someone away or isolate. You can also look at, why is my child needing to do so much verbal stimming? Do I need to provide them with more auditory input? Do I need to play more music? Do they need to wear headphones? I've even had kids that I let them go and record their verbal stims, and then they can listen to it in their headphones. That doesn't work for every kiddo. But it is frustrating when they interrupt. It is frustrating when they are doing things that can be annoying to others. So that is where you have your honest conversation, you have your boundaries set, you communicate it visually, you give a little grace to the autistic individual. And as your child gets older, they will mature and they will make adjustments on their own. Children, teenagers, their neurological system is still developing. Impulse control is really, really difficult. But I know, I do understand that the verbal is very challenging for a lot of parents. So protect your own ears as parents. Have an area they can go, or have find out why they need so much and provide that in another way. There's lots of sensory music that helps to provide the input that they're trying to get. For some individuals, it's not the auditory input. The verbal stim is because of a vibration in their throat. So you just have to know what they are needing. Oh, the constant scripting. Well, you know, those of us who are speech therapists, we love scripting. But it depends if it is a script that is, oh my gosh, that movie, that video, that is, we hear over and over and over again. So what I will say to the constant scripting that can be a challenge for those of us who have to listen to it is we know scripting is a great thing. We know that scripting is indication of a Gestalt language processor. We know that scripting is a way of communicating. We know that scripting is a way of practicing language. We know that scripting is a way to self-regulate. So we have to figure out the purpose of that particular scripting and then provide the support, whether it's using it as communication or if you have to set boundaries, but scripting is a really, really good thing. And when you understand working with your kiddo's speech therapist, you can understand your child's scripting, and it's just a game changer in how you can connect and relate.
Stacy, can I hop in and can we take one from
Of
the
course you
room?
can. Of course you can. Of course you can.
More Zoom people than room
No,
people.
go, go,
So
go.
trying
Go,
to
go,
be
go.
fair.
Hmm?
Do you want to talk for yourself or do you want me to read it for you?
You go read it. Read it.
It's fine to talk.
Hmm.
Hi, Stacy. Thank you again for your advice from the last session. I just wanted to say that I was able to get a sensory profile, and not only that, I was also able to they were able to create a sensory diet. So you bringing up those things, I made it a point to meet with my OT therapist and get some things in place so that he has, what he needs so he can be able to stem freely and create a routine for us. So thank you. My challenge now, my question is, and also too, I'm pulling the OT in more with our ABA meetings, so she could be right there, getting her more involved. Second thing is his speech. So I was able to get him a pediatrician who specializes in development, particularly all children with autism. And in our first meeting, the first thing that she said when I was describing, he's non-speaking, very verbal, very conversational. The first thing she said was apraxia. I would like get him looked at for apraxia. So I went to my speech therapist and I said, "Hey, do you think Sincere needs to be, or can we get Sincere evaluated for apraxia?" And she said, "No, he is a good candidate. However, he's not making enough vocal noises to be evaluated." And so I'm kind of like stuck there because if, so this is where we're at with his speech, because if the pediatrician like just after I describe things that he's doing, how the babbling is coming back and different things, and he needs to enunciate his words or get his mouth to make those words. And I'm asking her, I was like, is there a different type of therapy that comes with his functional therapy, which is working with the ACC device and pictures and stuff, versus doing therapy with apraxia?
Mhm.
And I haven't got a response yet, but I want to hear your thoughts on the two different speech techniques. And then very early on, they did try to say that he was a Gestalt. I think I'm mispronouncing it.
No, it's fine.
Yeah, okay. But that was when he was 2. So now he's 4, and then, the pediatrician is saying apraxia. So I'm just not sure, like, why I'm getting pushback, or should he be? What are your thoughts?
So, my thoughts are in the field of speech therapy, every therapist doesn't have every knowledge base, right? In terms of usually apraxia is something that a therapist specializes in. I'm not saying we're not introduced to it, but it's like anything else, right? If you go to the hairdresser, somebody is really good at coloring, somebody's really good at cut. So I think that maybe the speech therapist may not be aware that you definitely can assess for apraxia without verbal vocalization. There are assessments, and maybe you can ask if she knows another speech therapist that would be able to provide that. Or you can send me a message and I can send you resources you can share with your therapist. Maybe she's just not aware. And this is not on the speech therapist. There is so much information, and in speech therapy school, you're not provided with all the information. And so unless your job necessarily has available to you. So because I don't know the therapist, so I don't want to say she's doing it wrong, but you can definitely assess for apraxia, motor planning without vocalizations. And I think it is important to know if it is apraxia or not, because that changes the trajectory of what method of communication that you put in place. So it's important to get that information. Hopefully that answered your question.
We're going to grab another room person. And Stacy, I just want you to know we have like 4 minutes left. I know we have quite a few we didn't address. So let's grab another room person here.
Hi, I'm gonna be quick. My name is Antoinette. So, my son is nonverbal, 11, and one of the issues that I'm having with challenges is I know that kids on the spectrum, they tend to be repetitive, and I'm okay with that. However, I'm having issues like with drinking and eating. So he'll just drink. Like you can give him literally 3 cold drinks, I'm just whatever, 3 juices, and he'll still want something else. And he'll actually drink them. So at some point we like, no, you can't still be thirsty, you know, and stopping it. And even like he'll could eat oatmeal and then he wants something else. I'm like, no, that was 2 packs of oatmeal. You have to be full. Kind of redirecting that. I know some of it is the way they're wired, but sometimes I feel like he doesn't have that cutoff switch in his brain to like to know I'm full, enough is enough.
Mm-hmm. So this is a perfect example of where I say parents are their child's expert. It's just understanding why, right? You said it clear as day. He doesn't have the button. But what it is his interoceptive sensory system is not giving the message full, no longer thirsty. That is why, Antoinette, you and I are meeting, because we're going to get a good sensory profile and we're going to figure all that out. And that is going to eliminate a lot of those challenges. Autistic individuals don't necessarily do repetitive things because it's like I'm wired to do it. It's they go to what they know, but also if he's not getting the message that he's already satiated with fluids, he's going to keep drinking. He's going to keep drinking. The opposite sometimes occurs as well, where kids never drink, they never eat because they never feel hungry. So there's a solution for that, and it's going to be in that sensory profile that we're going to get done, and that challenge will go away. Fair enough? All right. All right. So
She said thank you. You couldn't hear her.
Okay. I will pull one. There's a couple of them that kind of go together. So there is the constant scribbling. There was a question about the focus on something, not being able to stop and not being able to transition. So this is what I will say. If you don't know what monotropism is, then you might want to know. And we may be able to clarify. I don't know if I can maybe I can do a training and give it to you guys to post on the website. But the reason our kids struggle with transition is because, one, the brain is hyper-focused in a flow. And when you disrupt that, then meltdown, frustration, because that monotropic sort of brain flow, it's there. They're hyper-focused. That's why neurologists, neurosurgeons, a lot of them are autistic. I know several, because they can hyper-focus for hours on those little neurons, right? And all the things that come in the brain. So the transitioning, hyper-focused on an item, and the monotropic brain flow is the reason we see the challenge of not transitioning, not wanting to go to the next thing. That's where we have to bring our visual schedules. We have to bring in our our timers, and we have to know our children. And I say to parents and teachers all the time, if you are watching a movie and the power, the internet, the cable, whatever can go out now goes out, and you've got 20 more minutes of that movie, you are fired up, frustrated. because it just stopped. What the heck? Can you imagine that happening 20, 30 times a day when you're trying to do something? And I say that, and I'll give one last example because I know we're on time. I mean, I don't have any trouble staying over, but I know that Claire and everyone has someplace to go. There was, I have a student and he needs the doors to be closed and all the shoes to be lined up. He needs that to happen before he can do anything, right? Whatever reason, I'm not going to argue with that. Simple. So I know if somebody goes to the bathroom while we're working together and they leave the door partially opened, if I try to take him away from that focus, I'm not going to get anything done. So you know what I say? Go close the door. The door needs to be closed. I'm not going to battle about the door. I don't care if the door is open or closed. But if he needs the door to be closed, his monotropic brain is going to keep hyper-focusing on that because that's what the autistic brain does. That's why the visuals help. They're going to finish whatever they start because it says you have to. Their brain, I tell people all the time, if I put a visual schedule and it says math worksheets, it doesn't matter if I put 5 math worksheets or 10 math worksheets or 1. They're going to work through it all because they start, they need to finish. That's why the visuals help. They need to know what to expect, what's next, and when I'm done. And when we provide that information, it just makes it so much easier. All right, last one about the food preferences. Autistic individuals, whether they are 5, 10, 6, 2, 20, 50, or 60, they choose foods that are sensory safe. They may try new foods at their own discretion, but they're going to go to foods that are sensory safe. And I say all the time, we are in a world now where we have access to a variety of foods, but the reality is eating the same foods over and over again used to be what we did, and many other countries still do that. And anyone who grew up in New Orleans, you know, every Monday we have red beans and rice. Wednesday is spaghetti day. Friday is fish day. But we tell autistic people they can't eat the same foods over and over again, when we would have a fit if somebody didn't have red beans and rice. I am from New Orleans and I live in Mexico. You know what I have in my pantry? Red beans and rice, camellia beans. I bring them back because if I don't have them on Monday, I feel like, what's wrong with me, right? So the food stuff I know can be a little tricky, but they're going to choose foods that are sensory safe. That's the reason why. I don't know how else to explain it. There's lots of other things. All right, so I love all these inputs. What I'm going to do is I am going to make a little, like a, what would you call that? Like a cheat sheet. And I'm going to put all of the challenges you all have listed, and I'm going to give scenarios, solutions, and links, and then you guys will have that access. Will that be helpful? I know.
People seem to like it. I
No.
did put the anonymous chats into the chat since you recorded the meeting. It wouldn't record the ones sent directly to me, but it will record the everyone ones. So I copied and pasted them in there.
Perfect. Thank you all so much. I know. I feel, Claire, sometimes I feel like we just need to do like a 2-hour Q&A. It's like people just need questions answered. All right.
True. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here today.
Yes.
And thank you, Stacy. We will be back next week for our next session on supporting skill building and communication. And we will have another guest presenter that day as well. And for those of you who got here late, we did have Angel that she was talking about was a non-speaking autistic. She's not dead. What was wrong with me? She is a non-speaking autistic individual who came and she had prepared some Q&A for us. So she prepared by spelling. And that was presented to all of us so we could hear her thoughts. So when we do send out the recording, if you came in late, I highly encourage you to watch. She was at the beginning, so it'll be really easy to find her. So yeah, thanks for being here.
Thank you guys so much. If you have any questions, I love questions. You can find me. Yeah, I do. I love answering questions. All right, I'm going to stop the share and stop the